Major support for these broadcasts is provided by the CUNY TV Foundation, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's window company, Capital One Bank, Perfect Building Maintenance, Chase Commercial Term Lending, Geneva Burns, Gian Tomasi and Webster, M&T Bank, the Wyckoff Group, Chelsea Lighting, Greenberg Traurig, LLP. Additional support is provided by Ackman Ziff Real Estate, AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi, USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Colliers International, NYC, Cushman and Wakefield, DDG, Douglaston Development, Levine Builders, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Eastern Union Funding, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Herrick Feinstein LLP, Hersha Hospitality Trust, Investors Bank, New Banks, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Center at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, John Katzimatidis, Red Apple Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, Madison Realty Capital, Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, People's United Bank, Popular Community Bank, SJP Properties, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Urban American, and these friends.
Kids grow up in the Bronx. They go to Ithaca College. They get involved with the furniture business. Then they have a couple of problems in the furniture business. Then they learn about being a retail leasing expert. And today, the vice chairman at Cushman and Wakefield. I'm lucky to have my friend over here, Joanne Podell. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You know, you really have some interesting stories about your grandparents. Tell me about your grandparents. Yeah. You know, your grandparents who came over from Russia.
It's a wonderful story. My grandparents, my grandfather was rode a horse in the Russian army. He pogroms, he was unhappy there, they were Jewish, and the dream was to come to America.
So he comes over in the early 1910,
yeah, the early part of the century.
And he comes over, but there was a prearranged marriage, or
Correct.
as we would say, the shidduch was made.
His bride.
His bride was supposed to come over, who you said to me was a beautiful woman, your grandmother, and she's migrating, and she's supposed to come over by boat from Hamburg. So what happens when she arrives in Hamburg?
So my grandfather, of course, he was here first. And he saved the money to buy the ticket. And he sent it over. It wasn't enough. She didn't know that until she got to the port and tried to buy it. And so she sat down on her suitcase and she literally cried. And a strange man and woman walked by. This is kind of a family history that we all remember. And elegant couple, American couple, and they looked at my grandmother and said, "What's wrong with her?" She doesn't have enough money. She can't buy a ticket. And this stranger handed her the rest of the money, and she got on the boat.
And she goes into steerage, down in
She goes into steerage. She never understood why my mother liked to go on cruises, because every time she heard that somebody went on a cruise, she said, "Why would you want to be on a boat?"
So she goes on the boat, and she arrives in America.
Yes.
And your grandfather is what, 19 at this time?
Yes.
She's 17, and they're in the Bronx. I don't know how they ended up in the Bronx. Most people end up in the Lower East Side, but you know, there must have been one of their
it might have been that was a stop.
Right,
I honestly don't know.
One of their landsmen introduced them, you know, brothers or fathers. And what's Grandpa do at this time?
He went to work at a factory making hats.
What kind of hats? Men's hats?
Men's hats, little caps, you know, those little caps that people wore that are probably very popular again today.
Right, so
he's making hats. And it's a legitimate job in a factory.
And then?
Depression, factory closes, no job.
So what happens then?
They really struggled. They were suffering. And my grandfather decided that the solution was that he would make hats at home and sell them on the street. So my mother and my aunts would sit around the kitchen table with my grandfather, and they all made hats, and he sold them.
So that's one side. Now
Yep.
let's go. That's your mother's side. Let's talk about your father's side.
Yes. Pretty similar story. They came from Russia, but they came married. They arrived here. He worked at a dress factory. He did pretty well. Depression, lost his business. There were 10 children on that side, and they really struggled.
Where was your father on the 10th?
I think he was the third youngest.
So he was the third youngest.
Yes.
And your parents met. You said you weren't sure about the story of how they met, but you said your father told you that when he met your mother, he said, "I'm going to marry."
That's
that
right.
woman."
And she wasn't so excited about it from what she said. She said, no, he wasn't the guy. But he was persistent. And ultimately, they married.
So they get married in 1942, and he goes to war.
Yes.
Where was he stationed?
Multiple places. He was in Michigan. He was in Florida.
And you said he had a knack. He learned when he was in the military electronics.
Yes.
And he taught electronics or something, which subsequently had a great impact on his life going on later over there.
Correct.
So it's 1945. He comes back. And it's interesting because few people realize that there was a major problem in housing
Exactly.
the veterans who came back. And many people would be surprised that in the borough of the Bronx, also in Queens and in Brooklyn, they made temporary housing called Quonset huts.
Correct.
And you lived in a Quonset hut for 6 years of your life.
We lived there. Yeah.
You and your youngest sister.
Yes.
So tell me, what was a Quonset hut?
It's a round corrugated building, metal. But when you were inside,
With windows?
yeah, it had windows.
I didn't know. Was it like an igloo or something like that? You know?
It kind of, yeah, and the houses were one next to another. And so there was a familiarity, and, you know, I remember playing with the other children outside. It was closed, you know, it was very tight.
Now,
one
but
to
where
the
did your
next.
grandparents live at this time?
They were
in the Bronx?
they were in the apartment that we moved out of, in the Bronx, the walk-up that they stayed in.
Okay, so they're over there in the apartment. Your parents are over here in the Quonset hut. And your father, who gained this electronics ability, TV is coming out.
That's right.
Appliances are coming out. Washing machines, dryers, other things.
That's right.
And you know, one of the best shopping areas in the Bronx, and it continues today, maybe that's why you have this retail roots over here, was Fordham Road. And
That's
he
right.
gets a job where?
At Vim,
VIM.
which was very famous in those days.
Yeah, Vim had a lot of stores.
A lot of
over there.
stores.
And he was what? He was the
He
salesman.
was a salesman,
He-
and thrilled to have the job.
right. And he was a good salesman.
Yes.
And subsequently he was, you know, he was a good salesman. And then you were able to move from the Quonset hut to a New York City housing project.
Correct.
And you were there for a couple
Couple
of
of
years,
years.
and you went to public school. And then you got the step North Merrick, right?
That's right. And that was a serious move. We were moving to the suburbs,
Moved to a house?
a real house with grass. I thought we lived in a palace. I was so excited as a little girl remembering moving there. It was such a wonderful move. You know, we had a backyard and we had a barbecue. I remember to this day, my father, how thrilled he was that he could make a barbecue. And my family, my father was one of 10, they used to have these family circle meetings. I don't know if you
Oh, the family
Yes.
circle.
And they would all come to the house, and it would be a thrill. Honestly, thinking back, the house is probably 1,800 feet, but it seemed like it was 10,000.
So now the entrepreneur that your dad was decides to say, I'm leaving Vim, and I'm going to go to Washington Street in the Lower Manhattan, which subsequently was probably destroyed because to make place for the World Trade Center,
Correct.
which because there were a lot of electronic stores going back in the 50s, and he's running an electronic store, right?
Correct.
And what do they sell?
washing machines, dryers, televisions.
But you said your father was a true entrepreneur, and he would make sure that it looked like there was more inventory in the place by keeping, he would sell the person the TV or something like that, and then leave the box.
That's right. So there was shelves of boxes that made him look extremely successful. He had limited inventory, and he had limited money. Obviously, people want to have a sense of confidence, and this is his idea.
So what happens with, how does he meet this Brazilian?
He is now selling product, and some Argentinian fellow comes in who was a pilot, who used to go back and forth to Argentina. And the two of them developed a friendship and a collaboration. He taught my dad to speak Spanish. My father helped him to improve his English. And together, they would sell product from one country to another.
They'd sell to Argentina and
Correct.
Brazil?
And he met a Brazilian through the Argentinian, and then he got very involved with Brazil.
So he's selling, he's basically, and he still has the store.
Yes, and it's all out of the store.
And he's exporting out of the store.
Correct.
And how do you find out, okay, when you're in Lower Manhattan, how do you end up on 46th Street?
It was random. It was completely random.
Now, 46th Street, I mean, 47th Street was the diamond
Jewelry,
district.
yes.
46th Street, there was some, and he opens up what on 46th?
It was called Senor Victor Boutique. And it was the first boutique of any kind from Brazil on 46th Street. He actually was the one for Via Brazil, which has become the Brazilian street.
And what do you sell in this store?
Everything.
Electronics too?
Electronics on the ground floor. And on the second floor where I worked, shirts and gift items.
What about the item that dissolved?
Yeah. So, you know, in those years, people would come from Brazil with suitcases, empty suitcases, and fill them up. They were voracious buyers. And they would like gift items for people and all kinds of things.
Tchotchkes.
Anything. So I'll never forget, they had this little net bag, and inside were multicolored beads. They were oil, and people would buy them for gifts. And I used to sell them. I actually sold everything on the floor. And I used to fight with my father over merchandising when I used to work there.
Now, so you're growing up in North Merrick, you're going to public school, you go a couple of summers to camp, and then it's time to work in the store.
Correct.
So this is what your summer job is. And how the kid who went to high school in North Merrick end up at Ithaca College?
I thought I wanted to be a physical therapist. It seemed like such a great profession, you know, how you help people.
And,
So I was accepted there, and Ithaca had a very good program.
and then subsequently
I
what
didn't
happened?
like
You just
science.
didn't like science?
I'm not good in science.
Okay, so you're at Ithaca College, you're not good in science, and your father says you better learn a trade or something like that?
Well, you know,
I mean, you
those
could have
years-
gone back to the store, you know, it would have been.
That's true, but I was going to be, the dream was of 10 grandchildren, not 10, multiple grandchildren. I was the first one to graduate from college. It was a tremendous sense of pride. And after that, many, many of my cousins did.
So
You know, being a college graduate was something that they all dreamt about for me.
But you didn't want to be a school teacher, so
I
what
didn't.
happened?
I was a good girl. You know, in those years, you graduated college with the expectation that you would get married, not necessarily work. And if you would work, you could be a nurse, that would be legitimate, or you could be a teacher. And I chose neither. So I took a liberal arts course, and I really enjoyed it. And the end of my junior year, the beginning of my senior year, my father said, so what are you going to do? You got to be a teacher. And so I took the required courses.
So you graduate, but unfortunately, every one of those people like which I didn't do, but most of the people I knew decided to become school teachers, so they
That's right.
avoided the Vietnam War.
Correct.
And you competed with those people,
Couldn't
and
get
you
a
couldn't
job.
get a job.
Correct.
So you're working like in
Yonkers.
homes.
I got a job with the school system, the Yonkers school system. But I had a very interesting job. It was called Home and Hospital. And I would be given 3 students to visit at their homes. And I would visit them. I had a syllabus, taught them. They were so thrilled to have me. It was very heartwarming that I did it. That was the truth. And then I did ultimately get a job in a junior high school for a short time.
And then you find your husband and you get married at the famed Plaza Hotel.
That's right.
And your husband was an attorney.
Correct.
And you give birth a year later to your first child.
A little less, like 9 months, maybe.
And he didn't like the practice of law. And all of a sudden, the entrepreneur dad of yours went into a new business. What was the new business?
One of his customers was a manufacturer of furniture in Brazil. And it was a wonderful product. And so he said, maybe you could sell it. So on my father's, one of the floors in this little building, he put the furniture. And he put one ad in the paper. And the ad said, buy this living room for $695. And it was a sofa, 2 chairs, an ottoman, and 3 tables. He puts the ad in the paper. Michael, there was a line out the door. Everybody went to work. It was so much fun.
Siemens first, it sounded like.
That's something like that.
And
yeah.
So he opened up these Brazil, what was it?
He opened Brazil Contempo.
And then your husband gets the first franchise of
Correct.
And that was in a very busy neighborhood, Old Country Road, across the street from Fortunoff. And he's in that business. And then you went to work for it part-time, right?
Yes. I helped open the store, and then I stepped back for a little bit. Worked with him when we organized it, and I sold on the floor for a while. And then I stopped, had my 3rd child. And
then what happens?
We get divorced.
Get divorced, and at this time, Brazilian furniture is no longer in mode?
The furniture just became expensive. The cost of shipping became astronomical. It was when we had the oil crisis. So the container costs were impossible to be able to justify what the retail would be. So my husband leaves, and I have a great location, and now I have to merchandise the store. I had no idea what I was doing. Really, I did.
So you go into Italian, merchandising Italian.
So what happened was my father said, I'd heard about this guy Natuzzi. He's in Italy, and there's a show in Italy. So I go to the show, and I meet Pasquale Natuzzi, and I say to him, this product is amazing. He says, okay, you'll be my first customer. He today has factories all over the world. He's quite well known. And for many years, I sold his product.
So wait, so here's this 33-year-old divorcee with 3 kids with 1 store. You opened up 10 stores?
Yeah.
10 locations? I mean, you were in New Jersey, you were in Willowbrook,
Correct. I was in Manhattan.
How do you operate 10 stores?
With a lot of people and a lot of overhead.
But the stores were there, and you had limited experience in operating a business, and then subsequently, really, you needed a warehouse for your store, and you enter into a limited partnership agreement with a warehouse in Long Island City, and what happens then?
I just wasn't knowledgeable enough to understand the costs associated with a limited partnership. My stores were profitable. The cost of the partnership, the debt service as equity would be taken out, which was, I think, probably a genius situation, but not for me. The cost of the warehouse became impossible to bear. Lost the house, lost the business.
So what happens?
Excuse me, I lose everything.
So all 10 stores close?
I had to.
So you go bankrupt on the stores.
Correct.
You file personal bankruptcy.
No, I didn't.
No, you
I
didn't
didn't
file.
have to.
You lose your home. You were living in Great Neck at
Correct.
this time.
Beautiful home, gone.
And
my kids go to work. Both 2 of them are in college. They took jobs to help me. My youngest son was wonderful. He took a job when he was in high school.
And you couldn't even afford getting housing, right?
I had nothing.
So what do you do?
Pretty scary. My ex-husband had owed me some money. I took that money, and it was security deposit. I opened a new store.
What kind of store now? I mean, enough grief on the stores. So what kind of store?
I opened up a multi-product store on Lexington Ave.
Selling what?
I was good at merchandising. And the stores, even though they were leather, I had other product as well. And because the manufacturers that I'd worked with, I never really burned anybody. I delivered everybody's goods at the end. I'm the one who was hurt. I gave whatever money I had to finalize
So
it.
you had a little 5,000 square foot store on
Correct.
Lexington Avenue and 32nd Street.
Correct.
Right? 33rd Street. And subsequently, what happens?
So I opened the store, and it's doing okay. I do it with a partner because I really didn't have enough money by myself. And I do it with a partner. And I'm working there for a year or so, and I'm miserable. I ran a business. It was exciting. It was dynamic. And now I'm sitting there in a store, and respectfully, I couldn't deal with the customer. It wasn't, there was nothing about it that I found exciting or challenging. So I go to visit a friend of mine who was in the furniture business, Bob Valenci, and I said, Bob, here, I'm hoping he's going to hire me, to tell you the truth. I said, I don't know what to do. He said, you know,
Bob Valenci of Maurice Valenci.
yeah. And he says to me, you should go into real estate business. I said, I don't know anything about real estate. He said, yeah, you do. Who chose your locations? I did. He said, who negotiated your leases? I did. He said to me, Joanne, go into the real estate business.
So how do you go into the real estate business? What do you pick up the newspaper? Or, you know, I want to be a real estate broker? What happened?
You go to Charlie Yorg.
But how do you know who Charlie Yorg was?
He had found some of my stores. He was my broker.
So you go to Charlie Yorg, who
When I say Charlie,
was probably the king of real estate leasing. And what do you say to him?
I said, Charlie, I need a job. Now I'm in my late 40s. I say to him, I need a job. What do you think? Maybe I could be a retail broker. And he's very effusive, as you know, and funny. And he said, oh, you'll be great. You should do this. You should do this. I said, oh, okay. I didn't know what else to do. Here I had a store I was miserable in. So I figured I'll try.
But being a real estate broker, you're a commission salesperson.
That's right. So I work 7 days a week.
So you work 5 days a week in commercial leasing, in
Correct.
retail leasing, and then you go Saturday and Sunday to work the retail store.
Yes.
So how long did it take you before you got the first deal?
A couple of years.
And what was the first deal?
Dwayne Reed.
Now, that was an interesting situation because I even passed the store the other day. This was on the corner of 62nd Street and 2nd Avenue.
Yes.
And it was a former bank. I believe it was a former chemical bank.
That's right.
And because the interesting thing is they put where the depository was, where you make the night deposits, they put the sign for Dwayne Reed.
That's right. And I remember that as part of the deal.
And this was, you know, this was the first Dwayne Reed, not in a retail location, within an apartment house.
Correct. They hadn't, all of the stores prior to this had been in commercial neighborhoods. This was their first retail store.
So how long did you stay with Charlie Yorg?
Several years, probably 3 or 4.
And then what happens?
It was time to move on.
So how did you find New Spectrum?
They found me. You know, and I was a hard worker, and I was a good networker. And I went to work with Ben and Gary and Steve. They had actually left Charlie as well and opened their own boutique. And I stayed with them for many years. And then this history, they were bought by
Newmark.
Newmark. And so I stayed at Newmark for that another 6 or 7 years.
So what happened 10 years ago?
So Bruce Mosler calls me from Cushman Wakefield.
At that time, he had just become CEO of Cushman and Wakefield.
That's right. He said, I want to build a retail department. I want you to come. And at that point, I'd pretty much established myself. I'd been in the business 10 years. And I'd done nicely and done some pretty high-profile deals. And he said, why don't you come over? And I thought, well, I could stay at Newmark. They're very nice people. But this sounds like an opportunity for me to grow with something. And in fact, it was. And so I believed Bruce, and I went there. And I'm still at Cushman Wakefield.
You've built some relationships with some major owners, you know, retailers, okay? TD Bank is one of your majors, Ann Taylor, I believe.
Yes.
And so how do you know, what's it like being a leasing broker in the world today? And as you said to me, as a female leasing broker.
As a broker, I think that there's nothing that's changed. You need to be educated about what your tenant needs,
You have
your
to be
landlord
tenacious.
needs. You need to be tenacious. Above all else, for me, you need to be honest. I feel so grateful. What started my real career in terms of representation, I was sending out flyers, doing promotional real estate for many years. And sometimes I still do, by the way. I like that. And at the time, 9 West was on a tear. They were opening stores everywhere. And I sent a flyer. Michael Sadi, the vice president of 9 West, called me up. I said to him, years later, and we stayed friends, I said, how come you called me? He said, well, your price was the lowest. I said, what do you mean my price was the lowest? He said, your asking price was the lowest.
Okay.
From the same flyer that everybody else had sent.
Tell me about your 3 sons and what they do today and your grandchildren and everything.
3 wonderful boys, young men. Josh, 43, he is he's independent now. He is in the real estate business as well.
He was in the retail leasing also.
He's still in retail leasing. He represents Kenneth Cole and 9 West and many other tenants as well nationally. My middle son, interesting story. He was in financial services. He did very well. He works for himself. He's entrepreneurial. My youngest son was in financial services. Now he's in social media. And I have 2 delicious grandchildren.
And what are the names of the grandchildren? Because
I
they're
have
going to be watching.
That's right.
And if you don't do that.
Jason and Emma, and they're 11, and they're a joy.
So, so from the girl who grew up in the Quonset hut, who learned merchandising on 46th Street, selling schmatters and Crest toothpaste, and then for the person who really lost it all, you've come back and you've been a success. And there are very few people who could say that they're a vice chairman at Cushman and Wakefield, one of the world's largest real estate brokers. And I'm happy that you were my guest today.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Thank you.